All right. My fellow digital gold diggers, gather around, pull up a virtual stool because we need to chat. And this one's a doozy, you guys. Seriously, a real head scratcher. You know, the kind that makes you want to chug a whole pot of coffee just to process it all. I'm talking about like an existential crisis for your crypto wallet, a deep dive into the very fabric of our financial future. And it all revolves around one thing, Bitcoin, and wait for it. Uncle Sam, yes, the big man himself, is looking to get in on the action, like big time. And when I say big time, it is like, you know, when your grandma suddenly starts posting TikToks, it is unexpected, it is a little bit awkward, but you can't, for the life of you, look away. Right, exactly. That is what we're dealing with here, folks. So here is the lowdown, the juicy gossip, the financial tea, if you will. A brand new bill just waltzed into Congress, all confident and flashy, and it is called the American Reserve Modernization Act of 2026, or ARMA. You know, because apparently everything important has to have a cool acronym. It is like a secret club for lawmakers, and us regular folks are just trying to keep up. Right. I mean, why can't they just call it the Bitcoin bill? Makes sense, super clear, but no, gotta make it sound all official and mysterious. Anyway, this ARMA bill, it is not just some random piece of paper, it has got a mission, a grand vision, and that vision is to create a permanent strategic Bitcoin reserve, a national Bitcoin stash, if you will. And get this, it wants to gobble up almost 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply. Like 5%. That is a huge chunk, a significant portion, a veritable mountain of digital gold. And the kicker, the absolute kicker, is they're planning to fund this whole crypto shopping spree with gold revaluation. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, we're going to break it down because it is kind of like financial magic, but with a few smoke and mirrors. You know what I mean? It is like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but the rabbit is Bitcoin, and the hat is, well, the government's accounting books. It is fascinating and a little bit terrifying all at the same time. Trust me on this one. Now, if you're feeling a little vu, like you've heard this song and dance before, you're not wrong, my friend. You're absolutely not wrong, because a similar bill, the Bitcoin Act, was introduced previously, but it didn't quite make it to the finish line. It was like a promising athlete who sprained an ankle right before the big race. A real bummer, but hey, you gotta respect the hustle. Right. And this new ARMA bill, it is building on that earlier framework. It is like a sequel, but hopefully with a happier ending for the proponents at least. And speaking of history, some of you might be thinking, hold on a sec, didn't we already have a strategic Bitcoin reserve? And to that, I say yes. My astute observers, you are correct. We did, it was cooked up by the previous administration. All thanks to an executive order, you know? Those things where the president just snaps their fingers and poof, something new appears. They're fast, they're efficient, like a financial express lane, but here's the rub, here's the catch. They're also super fragile, like a delicate glass sculpture, because the next president, if they feel like it, can just waltz in and smash it to pieces, undoing all the work with a flick of their wrist. It is like building a sandcastle, only to have the tide come in and wash it all away. A real heartbreaker, right? But if you get Congress, those lovely folks on Capitol Hill, to codify something into law with actual legislation, then it is much harder to overturn. It is like building a fortress rather than a sandcastle. It requires an army to bring it down. Not just one person with a different opinion. It takes an entire Congress to vote for something to happen or to undo something. So this bill, if it passes, it has got staying power. It has got muscle. It has got longevity. It is not just a fleeting thought. It is a solid, concrete plan, a permanent fixture in the financial landscape, which is, honestly, kind of a big deal. You know what I mean? It means this Bitcoin thing, it is not going away. It is becoming mainstream. It is becoming official. And that, my friends, is something worth paying attention to. So, let's dive into the nitty-gritty, the actual numbers. Because you know I love a good mathematical breakdown. It is like a puzzle. But with real-world implications, this bill would basically give the Treasury the green light, the golden ticket if you will, to scoop up 200,000 Bitcoin every single year for 5 glorious years. That is like a Bitcoin acquisition marathon. And by the end of it, if all goes according to plan, they'd have a whopping 1 million Bitcoin chilling in the strategic reserve. 1 million, think about that for a second, my friends. 1 million. Now, we all know, or at least we should all know, that there will only ever be 21 million total Bitcoin in existence. That is the hard cap, the absolute limit, the digital scarcity that makes Bitcoin so special, so valuable, so revolutionary. And right now, most of them have already been mined. Those early birds got the worms, but over the next 100 years or so, the last million or so are going to trickle out like slow drips from a faucet. Which means a million Bitcoin in the grand scheme of things is a pretty significant chunk, a sizable portion, a decent slice of the pie. In fact, if we do the math, and I love doing the math, if we want to know exactly how much of the total Bitcoin supply the US government would own under this ambitious plan, all we have to do is take that 1 million and divide it by the total 21 million. And what do we get? Drumroll please, approximately 4.7%, a little under 5%. That is right, folks, a little under 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply held by the US government. And get this, there would be a 20-year hold, a long-term commitment, on all federally controlled Bitcoin, including the few 100,000 they already have, which means they're not just buying it to flip it next week, they're in it for the long haul. They're playing the long game, like a seasoned investor, not some quick buck artist. And that, my friends, that speaks volumes about the perceived value and future of Bitcoin when the government, the very entity that once scoffed at it, is now looking to stockpile it like a precious commodity. It is like your parents finally admitting that your crazy hair color actually looks pretty good. A real validation, you know what I mean? Now this is a monster purchase, a massive undertaking, and it would unfold over the next 5 years if this thing actually gets pushed through. It is like watching a financial Godzilla stomp through the market. Right now, Bitcoin is hovering around $77,000, which means if they were somehow able to buy all 1 million Bitcoin at that price, which, let's be real, is pretty much impossible, because a purchase of that magnitude would send the price skyrocketing, like a rocket to the moon. But let's just pretend, for a hot minute, that they could. They'd be shelling out approximately $77 billion. That is a lot of zeros, a lot of greenbacks, enough to make your head spin, but you also have to consider they're going to be soaking up so much of the available supply, it is like a giant sponge, absorbing all the liquid, which means fewer and fewer people are going to be willing to sell at these low prices, because when Uncle Sam comes knocking with a huge wad of cash and wants to buy up everything, well, that is going to send the price much, much higher. It is basic supply and demand, folks, not rocket science. It is like trying to buy a rare comic book when a billionaire suddenly decides they want it too. The price is going to go through the roof, right? Exactly. So, over the next 5 years, if they drive the price of Bitcoin so high that their average cost ends up being, let's say, $200,000, then they'd be spending roughly $200 billion on this Bitcoin shopping spree. That is a serious investment, a monumental commitment, and it shows you just how much they believe in the future of this digital asset. It is not just a passing fad. It is a fundamental shift in the global financial landscape, and if they're willing to bet that kind of money, maybe, just maybe, we should be paying attention too. You know what I mean? So the first burning question, the one that has probably been nagging at the back of your mind, is why 1 million? Why 4.7% of the total supply? And the answer, my friends, is actually pretty clever. It is like a financial Easter egg. They're trying to get pretty darn close to the allocation that the United States government already holds of the total gold supply. Counting all those official reserves, the U.S. currently has well over 8,000 tons of gold, which represents somewhere between 3.5% to 5% of all the above ground gold supplies. So, this bill, it is aiming for a similar percentage, an equal footing, if you will. In the digital realm, it is like they're trying to mirror their gold holdings with Bitcoin, as if Bitcoin is the new gold, the digital equivalent. And honestly, when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because Bitcoin shares many of the same characteristics as gold. It is scarce, it is durable, it is divisible, it is a store of value. It is a hedge against inflation. So for the government to recognize that, to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and treat Bitcoin like a strategic reserve, like gold, that is a huge step, a monumental shift in perception, and it tells you everything you need to know about where this whole crypto thing is headed. It is not just for the tech geeks and the early adopters anymore. It is for the big boys, the institutions, and yes, even the government. It is a brave new world, my friends. A brave new world. Now, here is where it gets a little bit dicey, a little bit politically charged, because the way they've drafted this bill, they're claiming that the reserve would be established without any cost to American taxpayers, revenue neutral, they call it, and that any sale of Bitcoin would only be for the noble purpose of reducing the national debt, meaning they can't just sell it off to fund, like a new federal parking garage. It has to be for something significant, something impactful, something that benefits all of us. But here is the thing, my friends, and you know this as well as I do. Anytime a politician utters the words revenue neutral or without cost to taxpayers, your little spidey senses should be tingling. Your internal alarm bells should be blaring, because there is no such thing as a free lunch, folks. Seriously, there is always a catch. There is always a hidden cost. And I wouldn't expect lawmakers to understand this. I would fully expect them to be utterly ignorant of economic reality, because, as the old saying goes, ignorance is 9/10 of the law, right? They're often operating in their own little bubble, detached from the harsh realities of everyday economics. And that is why we, the savvy investors, the wise money makers, have to be extra vigilant, extra skeptical, extra critical. Because when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Right, exactly. So, how exactly would they pull off this revenue-neutral magic trick, this financial sleight of hand, without costing us, the hardworking taxpayers, a single dime? Well, it is all thanks to something called gold revaluation. Now, like we talked about earlier, the United States is sitting on a mountain of gold, over 8,000 tons, a staggering amount. But here is the kicker. The legal value of that gold is currently set at a measly $42 per troy ounce, because that is what it was worth. Back in 1973, like seriously, 1973. My parents weren't even born yet. That is how old that valuation is. It is like valuing a vintage muscle car at its original sticker price from the 70s. It is just not accurate. It is not reflective of reality. So, what in the world is gold revaluation? How does it work? And how would it conjure up enough funds to buy Bitcoin without dipping into our pockets? Well, the Federal Reserve, those brilliant minds over there, actually released a paper last year, all about official reserve revaluations, and how other countries have done this throughout history. Because right now, the official legal value of the gold the U.S. holds is $42.22 per troy ounce, and the U.S. government has 261.5 million troy ounces of gold. So if you do the math, the legal value of that gold is only about $11 billion, a pittance, a mere drop in the bucket compared to its true market value. Because if you know anything about gold, you know it is not worth 42 bucks an ounce. It is worth, like, $4,500 an ounce, a massive difference, a mind-boggling discrepancy. Now, a quick side note, a troy ounce and a regular ounce are actually different. A troy ounce is about 31.1 grams, and a regular ounce is about 28 grams. But for argument's sake, let's just use round numbers and say they mark to market, which means they just legally state that the gold they own is now worth what it is actually worth on the open market. If they were to sell it today at current prices, and if you take 261.5 million and multiply it by roughly $4,400 per ounce, you're going to see that they're holding well over $1 trillion worth of gold at current market values. So at somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000 per ounce, the U.S. government's gold stockpile is worth, conservatively, $1 to $1.3 trillion. That is with a capital T, folks. A truly astronomical sum, a staggering amount of wealth, just sitting there waiting to be revalued, waiting to be tapped into, waiting to unleash its true potential. It is like finding a hidden treasure chest in your backyard. Only it is a treasure chest full of gold, and it belongs to the government, and they're about to use it to buy Bitcoin, which honestly is kinda wild if you think about it. Truly wild. Now, let's rewind a bit. How much did we say it would cost to buy 1 million Bitcoin? Even if the price shot up to $200,000 per Bitcoin, it would still only cost them $200 billion. Which means they have a huge margin, a massive financial cushion, to drive the price of Bitcoin higher and still be able to buy as much as they want. It is like having an unlimited budget at the grocery store. You can buy all the organic kale you want, right? In fact, if they had to use the entire value of their gold stack, that $1 trillion, to buy 1 million Bitcoin, all we have to do is divide 1 trillion by 1 million. And what do we get? 1 million, which means technically, if they were to use gold revaluation to purchase the entire 1 million Bitcoin stockpile, they could purchase Bitcoin up to a total average cost of $1 million per Bitcoin. That is right, folks. $1 million per Bitcoin, a truly mind-boggling number. Is it possible that their purchasing alone, plus the ensuing frenzy to buy Bitcoin that it would cause, could drive Bitcoin up that high? Yes, it is possible. I don't think it is likely, because at certain points along the way, you're going to trigger a bunch of early investors to sell. People who bought at 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, they're going to start taking profits, cashing out, like a well-deserved victory lap. So I think it is unlikely that it would cost the full $1 trillion. But even if it does, how does gold revaluation actually produce the cold hard cash needed to buy all this Bitcoin? Well, you can go read the Federal Reserve's paper on it if you're into that kind of thing. But it is actually pretty simple. It is an accounting gimmick. Folks, a clever little trick to print money out of thin air, essentially. And that is why I said earlier, when a politician says revenue neutral, or it won't cost taxpayers anything, you gotta be concerned, you gotta see those red flags popping up everywhere, because something fishy is going on, something sneaky, something that smells a little bit like inflation. You know what I mean? So the first thing we need to understand is how the U.S. government currently holds its gold, and this goes way back, like way, way back, to President Roosevelt's gold program, where he, get this, illegally confiscated gold